Here we go.
Yeah.
And, okay, well, it's interesting. Here's some interesting... What's that photo over there?
That's all the governors who came from the South Asia and Southeast Asia, who were here for the CSN governors when I was the governor, so we hosted them.
So do you think that Mr. Rajapaksa is going to take it back?
Yeah.
Oh, you're Christian, okay. Interesting. You think he's going to take it back? Why? Why do you think he's going to take it back?
Writings on the wall.
The writing's on the wall. Do you think that the writing's on the wall, or do you think that it was just like a warning to the government, this government?
If you go around and see, like I have seen, the mood of the people and how much they A, dislike this government, and B, like Mr. Rajapaksa, that will tell you the story.
Why do you think he lost, though?
He lost at that time, but that doesn't stay forever the same way. He lost 3 years ago. That's perfectly natural for a politician. But many of them do come back. And he has made a phenomenal comeback. He set up his own party, new party. Within one year, he beats all the others, leaves them standing. So I think that's a pretty strong message.
Yeah.
There's no question. I mean, and with that, the trend is clear. Whatever these guys do, I don't think they can get their act together to take it forward. And every day we see new developments that are not favorable to the government. So I think come a proper election, and they have been postponing elections as much as possible. So there is a provincial council election that is due right now, which they should have held, but they haven't. And if they do hold that, it will be very, very clear as to where the mood of the people is.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, do you think that, so what's your relationship now with the Rajapaksas? Are you still quite close with them?
Yeah, I'm close to them. I've been advising them on many matters, particularly in relation to the economy and so on. And I have been also doing my own analysis of the economy at regular intervals and making a few comments on and off. So that has kept me in touch with the current political field situation as well as the current economic situation.
Sure, that's interesting. So who will because Mahindra cannot run again. So who do you think is going to run?
Mahinda cannot run as the president, but everything else he can do. And he has the ability today to command the people's wishes very effectively. If you take one example, there was one particular electorate during the last local government elections where the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramana, that was his proxy party, was disqualified because their nomination papers were faulty and they couldn't contest. So he just came for one meeting and he said, look, we are disqualified, but I think you should vote for this particular party, which was a totally independent party. Nobody knew who they were. And he said, I would like you to support that party as against the traditional UNP and the SLFP, the President's Party and the Prime Minister's Party. Guess who won? That shows that the people were willing to take his word and vote for a completely unknown quantity and put them into a local government office in that particular area, just on his word. So that also tells me, even though he may not be the president, as the constitution now is structured, he will be the main power base. Something like what you have in so many different countries where you have the power with a particular person, and then that is where it emanates from. So I think
Putin, for instance, right?
Putin, for instance.
So he's has supposedly the less powerful role, but he really is the Medvedev
Mentor,
is the one that's supposed to be the one that is supposed to have the power, but really it's with Putin.
Absolutely. Like when Lee Kuan Yew was there, even though Singapore had prime ministers, it was still his authority that ran through. And today you saw the other thing where Mahathir at 92 comes back.
No, I thank you so much.
Who's that?
Just a little bit, yeah. Thank you. No, I have been.
You
on
didn't you didn't follow the story?
No.
He comes in and beats the UMNO party, which has been in power for 60 years, comes back, and people vote him. 92 years. Can you imagine?
So you're saying a fish would have a better chance than this government?
Oh yeah.
A dog on the street, maybe. Okay, that's interesting. So
I won't just write them off completely.
No.
They will try. I mean, come election, they will try very hard. But the people's feelings are so strong. You'll probably find that they'll get wiped out. That's my feeling. Okay.
So who will lead the? So did the brothers figure out who will lead the party then?
Having known the family, I think they will work that out if they wish to. I mean, but yet it will be Mahinda Rajapaksa's call. If he says it's one of the brothers, well, that person will have a very strong claim. But you never know, he can even say somebody else. So it all depends on what he says, what he is going to, whom he's going to endorse. And that will go a very, very long way.
Sure, of course. Because I was saying that maybe it's Gotabaya, maybe it's Basel, but it's up in the air.
Up in the air.
I thought it was going to be decided this week. I thought there was going to be a decision. No. Okay.
They are a smart political family.
When do you think it will be? Yeah, seriously.
Yeah.
I can't. One of my friends who used to be the ambassador here in 2008, plus, minus, I'm not sure, but he said that Sri Lankans are the smartest politicians, and he's served in a lot of different countries, and I really respect him a lot as an ambassador. I hadn't yet been to Sri Lanka, so I didn't know what to expect.
Okay.
I called him and I said, going to Sri Lanka, what should I know? And he said, Sri Lankans are the smartest politicians I've ever met.
He said that?
I was surprised because, I had worked in Afghanistan alongside him. I, seen him in many different roles. And I didn't know anything about Sri Lanka.
Is that Robert Blake?
No, not American. But,
Okay.
But,
That's okay. He was my friend too, that's why I asked.
Oh, Robert Blake, I haven't met him.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. When do you think that they will announce?
They won't announce till the elections are announced.
But the general elections or the presidential?
At the general election, there is no need for a presidential candidate to be announced. Everybody knows who the prime minister would be. So it would be for the general elections. It's not going to be an issue. But if there is a presidential election announced by the president before his term, let's say tomorrow, but he cannot tomorrow, but he can do so from about October onwards. So anytime after October, if he does that, then there will be a necessity to name someone. But otherwise, it will probably be a general election, at which time the party will probably field their candidates. But everybody will know that it's Mahinda Rajapaksa who is going to be the Prime Minister.
And the law allows him to do that, right?
Sorry?
The law allows him to do that. Okay. Okay, that's interesting. So when you look at this government and you look at the government that you served in, and you served to the end of 2015, right?
End of 2015, right up to January 8th, 2015. I served from 2005 end, really.
2005.
So nearly 10 years.
As central bank governor.
Central bank governor from 1st of June 2006. Till then I was secretary to the Ministry of Plan Implementation. Before that, for about 6 or 8 months.
Okay, that's interesting. So when you look at this government and you look at the government that you served, if you had to say, this is what we did and this is what they did, can you talk a little bit about what you left behind? I mean, not just you, but your government, versus what this government has done economically.
Yeah, economically, we inherited a country which was having a per capita income of $1,240, pretty much in the low level. But we finished off in just a period of 9 years at 3,850. So that's nearly triple the per capita.
Mm-hmm.
The GDP went up from $24 billion to $79 billion. So that's again 3 times. We left behind a huge infrastructure development, which we did not have before. 24-hour electricity with new power plants, road network which was completely overhauled with expressways. Now the expressway that will have probably come in was built during that period. Southern Expressway and so many other plans that were developed for that. Then, of course, in addition to that, after the end of the war, we fought the war also at that time. We had to spend a lot of resources at that time. We brought down the debt to GDP ratio from 91% to 71%. Although the current Prime Minister is eternally shouting that he has got a debt burden, we left him just a 71% when, although we inherited 91% debt to GDP burden. With that, we also made sure that the north and the east was developed. If you go to the north today, you'll have new roads, you have new developments, all that. The restructuring, the reconstruction effort was a huge effort. It was completed. Then, of course, with that, we also developed the human capital. There were new IT industries, the telephone penetration, the IT penetration, all that was enhanced quite significantly. Stock market went up by about sixfold. The overall market capitalization rose tremendous. I forget the numbers, but quite a significant number. You can check that out. So in almost every aspect, we brought in a balanced development, Maria. That was our theme. We did not want to only focus on 1 or 2 areas. We were fairly keen that all areas progressed together. Poverty came down from 12% to 6%. Mm-hmm. Electricity was one of the biggest achievements we had. When we started off, we had only 73% of the people having electricity. We finished up with 99%. So that almost everyone in the country had electricity. So those were huge social improvements which were carried out. As against that, when you see the last 3 years, hardly any infrastructure projects have been added to the national assets, as it were. We find that the debt to GDP is going up to nearly 80% now. We see inflation going up. We see inflation was at 3%. Today it is at 6%. Mm-hmm. Inflation going up. Then we have the famous bond scam, which has given a tremendously bad name to the country. We had $3.4 billion of investments in our treasury bills and treasury bonds, particularly from the US. Mm-hmm. Today it has come down to 1.7 billion. So there has been an exodus of investments. They had to replace it with sovereign bonds, where there the risk is not taken by any foreign investor but by the country, because those are dollar bonds. And we find that the dollar bonds are yielding something like 6.7587% interest. So we are paying some high fancy prices for that as well. So going forward, I can see a deterioration in almost all the macro numbers, and that's frightening. And we hardly see anybody in charge. That's the other sad part. If you talk to the IMF, I don't know whether they'll tell you, but they'll they tell others in confidence, we see some of them talking about it at various times, that they have nobody to go to and talk to something. Because so many people are supposed to be in charge. President is going one way, Prime Minister is going another way. So it's a tough call for even the officials. I pity them sometimes because they don't have a clear picture about what's to be done. So all in all, the network is not conducive for the development. If you take the FDI, last year they proclaimed that the FDI was high and that was the highest ever. But every single one of those FDI was a part of the investment that flowed in from projects that were started before 2015. Port City, Shangri-La, ITC, all those are projects started before, and hardly any projects which have started after 2015. So, and that's not happening even today. Even today, there's no new projects coming in. Although they've said, we'll have all the projects coming from the US, we'll have projects coming from Europe. No one is invested.
And I mean, they actually kind of upset the Chinese, right? When they first came to power.
They upset the Chinese and they had to go back to them on bended knees thereafter because they couldn't find anybody else. And I was at that time aghast that they stopped such a project which we had a good handle on, and then because they stopped it, they lost their momentum. A, the country's momentum was lost, and B, because they had erred in stopping that, they had to give in to the Chinese a lot more than they would have wanted to. Perhaps even annoying India as a result.
Well, how do you see that they had to give in to the Chinese even more?
Because the Chinese contracts were designed to have ownership with the Sri Lankans. But China could manage the Hambantota port to some extent, but not have any ownership at all.
Hold on, I want to make sure this is recording because somebody called me halfway through. I want to make sure that this is...
What our guys do is they put it to the aircraft mode.
That's a good idea. You're teaching me after you had... Yeah, it's recording. Yes, it's recording, sorry. Okay, so, sorry, you were saying that the Hambantota was designed that...
Sri Lanka
have
the control, and China would have been a contractor, and China, together with China, there would have been so many other contractors as well. Someone doing a refinery, someone else doing ship making or whatever. But it was all under the control of the Sri Lankans. But today, they had to part with that control. Today, they had to part with the $148 million which they had to settle as damages to the port city, which was the damages for the delay. And because they couldn't pay it off with cash, they had to give an additional 5 acres of land to the Chinese. So they've taken some decisions like that, which actually you wonder who on earth could have advised them in doing that. So we have come out weaker. We have come out, and during that period, because the country's economy came down, they had to have the Chinese anyway. So they had to go back to them and say, please come back.
Yeah. And because nobody stepped in, right? They had said, China's the evil, and we're going to repair relations with India and with the US and with Europe, and then nobody came.
Nobody came. And nobody could come. Actually, every time, my own view is I'm giving you maybe something which is different from what you generally hear. At different times of history, there are different countries which have the cash. You got to understand that. At the moment, it is China. So they are the ones who are investing all over. They are investing in the US bonds of 1.6 trillion. So if they do that, they must be having a lot of cash to invest all over the world. So They invest in Sri Lanka, they invest in Pakistan, they invest in Bangladesh, they invest in UK, they invest all over. So if they were the guys who are investing, we don't have to get angry with them and shout and scream. We got to say, okay, come and invest. And they also, actually I must say, they never demanded anything unusual from us. They gave us loans, we negotiated the loans, and they also were happy to come and do those projects for which we committed ourselves with a loan, and we were paying back all those loans. So they did not at any time ask us for ownership, I must say. But today, I think the Sri Lankan government has rushed to provide them with ownership.
Yeah. Why do you think that?
That is because they have messed up the economy and they found that they cannot manage. And they were like this famous comments where you comment to make it like a prophecy. Our Prime Minister was shouting to everyone that he cannot pay the debts. So if you shout to someone saying that you cannot pay the debts, naturally your creditors are going to take advantage of that. And they did.
Sure.
So I think we have only ourselves to blame, and we have got ourselves into these positions where we have given total control. One of the most strategic assets in the Indian Ocean is the Hambantota port. One of the most strategic assets, not only from the point of view of Sri Lanka, but from the point of view of the world. So that has been bartered away for some pittance.
Mm-hmm. So to play devil's advocate, this government will say Hambantota Port didn't make any sense. It was not a port that needed to be built. We were left with a black hole that was burning money. It had no business. The previous government of Mr. Rajapaksa, I mean, there had to be a presidential decree saying no more delivery of vehicles to Colombo. It all now needs to be diverted to Hambantota. That presidential decree was in 2012. I mean, that shows how this port wasn't even working under the old government. And that old government left us with a financial burden that we then had to figure out what to do with. The only thing we could do, given our finances, was to get rid of it. What do you think about that?
I think that's not a position that they can hold on to. For the last 30 years or 40 years, Sri Lanka has been talking of building a port in Hambantota. This didn't start with Mahinda Rajapaksa. This was on the cards for the last 30 to 40 years. But no one could do it. No one had the ability to make it happen. Mahinda Rajapaksa did that. And as you know, every port takes a long time. Sri Lanka's Colombo port is 800 years old. But only during the British that it really started being built on a sort of a professional way. Mm-hmm. And only a few years ago that it reached a 75% capacity. And then it reached 90% capacity just about a couple of years ago. So you can see these are long-term, 100-year assets that you build. Mm-hmm. You don't build a port for it to give you a return in 2 years. Mm-hmm. It will take time for ships to get to know about Hambantota. You have to develop your skills. You have to see that there's a marketing effort put in, and all that was happening. When this government, when they were in opposition, they said, it's a white elephant, it's terrible and all that. So I think people got carried away with that, no doubt. But at the same time, we must understand that these assets have to yield over a period of time. Mm-hmm. Shangri-La built a hotel in Hambantota. Today, unfortunately, it is only having 15% occupancy. But I don't see them rushing to sell it. Because they know Hambantota will do well. Mm-hmm. They'll hold that hotel. 3, 4, 5 years time, it will make money. Mm-hmm. During the wartime, Hilton came and built the hotel, which is in Fort. Taj Samudra was built at that time. But today they are making money. But these are assets that you would build for a long period of time. So to treat a strategic port as being not providing you with a huge quantum of cash within 2 years of it being built is, I think, completely out of question.
Well, what they'll say though as well is that under your government, there was, Chinese loans went from something like, 300 million to 4 billion.
That's okay, but I'll tell you why.
And they were coming due, and there wasn't enough money
There was
coming
absolutely no problem. That is a lie. And we have seen them lying through their teeth on many occasions. Politicians lie. But the actual figures cannot lie. If you take the debt to GDP, with all these Chinese loans, it was down to 71%. That's the bottom line. Whether you get a Chinese loan or you get a Japanese loan or you get an American loan, it doesn't matter. Actually, the American loans that we have with the treasury bills and treasury bonds, as well as the international sovereigns bonds that we had issued at that time, those are pretty high too, the quantum. There are a lot of Americans who are investing in Sri Lanka. All your top funds were investing in Sri Lanka. From the Black Rocks to the Aberdeens to the JP Morgans, all of them were investing. So we did have investments from others as well. Chinese investments were the visible investments because they built a port or they built a power plant. The softer investments came from you, came from the West, and those monies are still with us, some part, but some part has flowed away. But overall, we had a mix, and the total debt that Sri Lanka had, which is the fundamental point that you have to manage, was coming down gradually.
But what they'll also say, to be fair, is that Chinese debt comes at a lot more pricey equation than...
Again,
and I went through the financial statements, and you look at I went back as far as 2006, and you do look at, like, for instance, a loan from China versus a loan from Japan or Korea or Kuwait, and you have Chinese loans at 2% with a 0.5% commitment fee, and then a Japanese loan at 0.125%.
Do you know why a Japanese loan is at 1.0?
Even 0.0, yeah.
Do you know why that is?
Why?
I'll tell you.
Tell me.
When Japanese loans are in yen,
Mm-hmm.
and you find that the Sri Lankan rupee is depreciating against the yen,
Mm-hmm.
you will find that hit is a lot greater than the interest hit. I've done my math, and I can tell you, you may do that yourself if you have the figures. If you take the Japanese loans at the point that we have taken, the amount of money that it yields, and at the time of payment, the amount of money that you have to pay back out of your total amounts that you have to appropriate out of your total budget is enormous. So this is the normal fallacy. I won't tell you. A lot of people think of it, okay, looking at the rate itself is enough. Do you know that the Hilton Hotel, which I told you about, still hasn't been able to pay a dividend? And why? Because they have a yen loan. Mm-hmm. So it's not a question of the interest rate only. It's a question of the totality of the circumstances, which many people do not understand and appreciate. But those of us who have been looking at it from the point of view of overall conditions, you find that it is completely different. The Monetary Board, even today, has to sign off on every loan, every foreign loan. So there is a department which does the math on this. And then you find that certain loans which appear to be extremely great are not so. They will have insurance payments upfront, which sucks the money out. They will have the problems arising from the depreciation of the currency and the possible parity rates that will occur. There will be other strings attached, like you have to buy certain items from that particular country only, which means that you will have to pay a much higher rate for those items than if you buy it otherwise.
That's fair. That's a fair point. But the Chinese,
Renminbi.
Thank you.
Or the yuan.
I don't know why I always have a hard time with that one. It did appreciate actually quite a bit during the financial crisis. It has come down since, but it did appreciate, and sometimes the loans were often in dollars.
Loans in dollars will be better.
From the Chinese. And you could say that when the loans were in dollars and you look at what the US was giving you, for instance, if you want to compare apples to apples, dollar loans, the US would still give you more favorable interest rates.
I'll tell you, you see, this is
With less fees.
again another fallacy. Because you find that there are several indicators that you look on a macro scale, Maria. One, which is your total debt servicing for the year. In 2014, it had come down to 4.4%. It's there in the central bank's annual report. Now it has gone up to nearly 5.8%. So if they were able to do something different, it should have come down. What is happening? Again, another thing that happened was that Sri Lanka was not a poor country after it passed about $1,500 per capita income. Nobody was going to give us concessionary loans. We had to borrow at a higher rate. And if we could have opted for a 3% growth and not borrowed and just gone on telling our people to stay poor for 40 years, which is an option. Or you can borrow. You can say, okay, we will have accelerated development and then we'll do so, which is what we did. And whilst doing so, we also made sure that our numbers stayed benign. Because if you look at the total debt servicing, it was 4.4%. It has now gone up to, I have the figures, we did some...
Debt servicing, was that when you left, or?
Debt servicing is 2014. 2014
Was, what percent?
Actually, not 4.4%, it was 4.2%. Total debt servicing, Chinese loans, American loans, British loans, Japanese loans, all that put together, it was 4.2%. Went up to now 5.5%. It has been rising steadily. So, overall, they have been borrowing at rates which have been high as well because of the fact that due to other reasons. For example, if you have high inflation, your interest rates will go up. So, if you don't manage the rest of it, that impact is a lot worse than the other one. That's my point.
So, do you worry though about Chinese debt trap?
No.
You don't? Why not?
Because I don't consider debt as being Chinese debt, Indian debt, British debt, American debt and so on. I treat debt as debt. When you put all the debt into one basket, it doesn't matter which debt. I think the Americans are always quite... they have a phobia about Chinese debt. Because they feel Chinese debt is going to upset anybody. It's not Chinese debt. You can go down that same way with any other country's debt. Now, if you take the sovereign bonds that we floated, I have here the sovereign bonds. The last sovereign bond that we floated at the time that we were in office was $1 billion $1 billion at 6% and another $500 million at 5.1%.
1 billion
at 6% and 500 million at 5.1%. This government has increased that. In 2015, they borrowed at 6.85. 2015, they borrowed at 6.85. 2016, they borrowed at 6.85. 2017, they borrowed at 6.2%. So, someone can turn around and say, look, the American debt has gone up.
Well, but you're talking about, well, bonds, though, are different. Bonds are different than saying, you're
that's
my
where
great
I'm coming
friend. You know what I mean? Like, China, you're my great friend. Like, friends are supposed to scratch each other's backs, right? Like, I mean, for
Why
instance,
can't we scratch the Americans' back?
I mean, the Americans...
That's what I don't agree. You see, what has happened is,
because the Americans
when we pay the
put
Americans, you don't mind.
Into a, and I'm not saying that this is right or wrong, but the Americans got onto their high horse and they said, human rights, human rights, human rights. China doesn't really have that consideration. So that's also something that maybe affected your ability to tap in.
Not really.
Right? No?
Not really. No. Americans invested too.
They did, but not at the rates of the Chinese. And the
Certainly.
Americans will say, but we are the largest grant provider to Sri Lanka.
Were they?
The largest grant provider to Sri Lanka.
Come on, that's not going to
But
happen.
you
Those
also
are
look at
nothing.
the Ministry of Finance reports from 2000. I think it was 2012.
That's what the Americans like to think. But
Sure.
those grants are a minuscule amount. It has absolutely no impact on the country's economy. I can tell you that.
But China only gave 10 million in grants
Doesn't matter.
in 2012 compared to 4 billion of loans.
Why should Sri Lanka be on a grant? Are we beggars? I don't believe that.
But if you have a
I
friendship
want-
with the country, you give grants.
Not necessarily. We don't need to go and ask for grants. I certainly, in my 9 years, we never ever asked for anybody's grant. We said, if you want to invest, you invest. We'll respect you. That's it. You see,
Fair enough.
fair enough.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we need to now be beholden to any country and say, we want grants and all that, Maria. That story is over. At least with the previous government. I don't know about this government, their policy. So, because that shouldn't be a consideration. Okay, we'll get grants. For what? Are we going to be beholden to everybody forever? No. That shouldn't happen.
When you look at Hemantota and you look at laughs, for instance, being squeezed out, a Sri Lankan company, a big Sri Lankan company, an important Sri Lankan company, being squeezed out of Hemantota, which should be welcoming Sri Lankan companies. And then you look at the issue with Blackstone and Greenlink. Does that worry you?
Do you know Laugh Gas was a tiny little company in 2006?
Was I sorry?
They were a small company in 2006. If you do a little research, you'll probably find that. They grew during the period of 2006 to 2015.
Sure.
So, actually, during that period, many Sri Lankan companies were on the up. There were some which were billion-dollar companies. If you take Mass, if you take Brandix, some of them were small companies. But they grew because they were also given support to grow. And that was a deliberate policy of government. Just like the American government, Trump is saying every day we give the support to the American companies. I don't see anything wrong in that. Giving support to your own indigenous companies is an important facet of policy.
Sure.
So that policy we followed. And there were many I don't know the policy now, and whether they have not been able to do certain projects that they wanted to do. But I can tell you during that period, they were given sufficient support to move forward. Some of the big roads were built by Sri Lankan companies.
But do you feel like this Hemantota deal is going to, I mean, have you been following the Greenlink Blackstone situation?
No, not.
Okay, I'll skip that question. One question I do have for you is that, Hemantota was started, it was supposed to be phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Phase 1 was supposed to create this port that had ro-ro and bunkering, kind of a simple port, let's put it that way. And it was supposed to pay for phase 2. And phase 2 was only supposed to be delivered, I think, next year or year after. But then it seems that Mr. Rajapaksa decided to speed up phase 2. And the initial loan for phase 1, which was for 307 million, given at, I think it was LIBOR plus 90 basis points. Do you remember?
I can't remember the exact
Okay.
numbers.
That was then renegotiated to 6.3%.
These are all the stories that people say. I don't think those are correct. They would have been all taken as decisions on the strength of the necessity for a project as well. If you look at all the loans, there will be a rationale for it. And anyone can go through that, because I know for a fact that all these loans cannot be taken by Rajapaksa by himself. That's what some people try to make it out to be. But we have fairly strong procedures and processes in our country. Those will have to go through the Department of External Resources. There will be the Economic Research Department of the Central Bank, which has to sign off on those numbers, saying that they are satisfied that those are of value. After all those factors are done, only a foreign loan can be obtained. Just because Rajapaksa feels like it or Ranil Wickremesinghe feels like it, it cannot be taken. There will be a process that will make sure that that is done. And at different times, there may have been different rates because of the crisis in the world, or due to the other factors in Sri Lanka which made us a bad risk at one time. We were at war, we had difficulties. So it can be due to those risks. I don't know the details. If you give me access to the documents that the central bank as well as the Ministry of Finance has, I could tell you. But offhand, I wouldn't believe anything that says 0.9 became 6%. I mean, that's kind of thing which is for purposes of the headlines.
But you negotiated the 2010 financing for the Phase 2 project, right?
Not that. I negotiated all the bonds, and I know that each bond is different to the other. That's why each bond will have different rates of interest. Now, after Sri Lanka has turned the corner, we have got into a much better situation than earlier. Mm-hmm. Why are we paying 6.8% for a loan in the international markets for the bonds? Why? Because maybe the global pricing has changed. So if somebody looks at it alone, I will say it is high, but I cannot tell you that it is due to any other reason unless I go into it, because there will be factors that I'll have to consider and then see. That is where a lot of people jump the gun, Maria. They just say, okay, now it was so much, now it is so much. I don't think that is the right way of looking at it. You have to go through it and see. And the final impact is on your bottom line. As the country is concerned, how much is it in your investment? How much is it going to cost? And are we going to get more out of that?
That's the important part.
Important part. Are we
but
going to get more?
But you didn't negotiate any of the loans with the Chinese then on Hamilton?
That was done by the Treasury, but I know they did it professionally. They were very cautious about how because there were a lot of loans that we turned down, not only from China.
Wait, but the Treasury of the central bank?
The Treasury is the one that negotiates the loan, but the central bank has to sign off before a foreign loan is taken. So there also will be another check and balance that is there.
But that's the Treasury within the central bank, not the Finance Ministry, correct?
No, Treasury as in the External Resources Department in the Finance Ministry, which does the initial negotiations. But even they cannot take a loan by themselves, because it will have to be okayed by the Monetary Board, which relies on the Economic Research Department, which again evaluates all these loans from the point of view of the country, its repayment ability, and so on. So it's a process. It shouldn't be considered by these headlines that politicians generally dish out, which can be for different reasons. These are hard-nosed, technical, professional decisions.
Sure, but there are two things. One is that you said that Hemantota, first of all, within the government's own feasibility projects, Hemantota was economically unviable.
No, it was viable.
I saw on the Sri Lankan Ports Authority website, it says that from the 2000, I think there was a press release from 2008, either way, under your government, 2008, 2009, under your government. It said several economic feasibility studies came through and said that this was unviable. But it was done by presidential decree, correct?
No, it's not like that.
But was Hemantota under presidential decree?
President has to sign off, but there will definitely be discussion about that. And if you find that the first project report does not show a feasible situation, then what would you do?
The second one? You
will change it. You will see how best can we make it viable. That is the way business operates. I have been 32 years in the private sector, Maria.
Sure.
In so many companies. I know sometimes you have to tweak projects. You have to tweak the scenario in order to see that you can get a better deal overall. So if initially you find that it has not shown viable results, that doesn't mean that you abandon the project forever. I mean, it would have been many projects which would have started off as not being viable, but people would have put their heads together, worked out ways to make it better. And that's the way it works. So I think we shouldn't read too much in it. Why would the Chinese pay today the total cost that they lent to get 60% of the project? Why would they do that?
What do you think?
Why? Because it has value.
What was that?
Because it has value.
Well, they said it only has value if you give us 15,000 acres around it.
So they're
I mean, it seems that they also thought that the port was.
So that
not
15,000
viable.
acres was there for the government too.
Yeah, but it wasn't included in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3.
Yeah, you see.
Under your government, the way
And
that
our government,
port,
we had
it
no
wasn't 15,000
intention
acres.
of giving it to the Chinese.
But it also wasn't part of the development plan for Hamilton.
Why not?
But I'm saying that the original, under your government, the original.
If this
Hamilton-
government could have added 15,000, you think our government couldn't have?
But it wasn't part of the plan, is what I'm asking.
Yeah,
under
what
your
I'm saying is plans can change.
Sure.
Plans
But-
can change. Plans can be differently managed. So all that can happen, Maria.
So, but the thing that I'm kind of confused about though is that if phase 1, so if the government then said, okay, our new plan in order to make this a feasible project is to make it so phase 1 is a simple port bunkering ro-ro. That pays for phase 2, which we think could be delivered in 2020, right? And then Mr. Rajapaksa decides, no, I want to expedite phase 2.
You see, we never
and do
said
it 10 years earlier.
we never said that it's going to be unviable. We were always going to make it viable.
Yes, but that was
And
the
we
plan.
would have.
But that
Did you ever hear anyone saying in government that we cannot pay the loan?
No, but why did you decide to expedite phase 2? is
Why
what
not?
I don't understand.
Why not?
Because
What's
at
the problem?
that point, phase 1 hadn't even been operational to pay off for phase 2.
So if we get it going and we have a bigger scale
Sure.
and we are going to market it and then do it and then put Sri Lanka on the map fast, what's the problem?
Because then you get to a point where you can't pay off for
We
your
could pay off.
loans.
That's why I've been telling you from the beginning. We were
At
at
that point, you would pay
71%.
off. But you had loans coming due, you had maturity.
We
coming.
would have, that is the story that these people are selling.
Mhm.
And you don't buy that story.
Okay.
Because
That's why I'm here to talk
yeah,
to you.
I'm glad you are talking to me. Don't buy that story. Sri Lanka was never in trouble.
Okay.
Never in trouble. You go through and show me one macroeconomic indicator that appeared to be on the wrong side, then I will tell you that I'll withdraw my comment.
Mhm.
But there wasn't. It was in great shape. It had all the macro fundamentals moving in the right direction. We were confident of that. So we wanted to even develop it faster. You see, what sometimes you from the West do not realize is that we have to also deliver these developments to our people fast. You try and tell a person who is in poverty that you will take him out of poverty in 15 years' time. You think that will sell? You think that's what we need to tell? We didn't follow that. We said we want to have fast growth. We want to put Sri Lanka on the map and take it forward. That is one of the reasons why today you see the popularity of Mr. Rajapaksa. I can tell you that. Because people said Sri Lanka was like a huge factory. Things were happening. Things were moving. There was economic development. And one of the ways it would have been done is we would have accelerated projects, we would have doubled projects, we would have seen that it became big. We had a vision. We had a drive. We were not fighting with each other to see that we pull one part of the government down with the other. That is where the difference was. And we were in a hurry. And that is to see that the people of this country are given the benefits of economic development. That is why you will probably find that the popularity is now even soaring. That's why I'm confidently telling you. Because people want that to happen. People are saying, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So, I'm glad that you asked me the question. We doubled certain things. We went fast. Do you know they haven't been still able to add a single megawatt into the grid? Proper megawatt? Other than the housing solar panels that we are all fixing? No.
Why do you think this government was so quick to negotiate this Hamilton deal and lose such a great port or such a great asset?
Two things. One is their incompetence. They do not have the ability to think far, to think of the bigger picture and get things done. Two, they were in a hurry to destroy the Rajapaksa name. They even went to the extent of storing paddy at the airport lounge.
In Hamilton.
In Hambantota. That is, they were in a huge hurry to discredit. and to say all these projects are of no value, it has no meaning, it was bad, it was corrupt, and so on. That is why they actually failed, because they did not want to build on the projects that the Rajapaksa government had started. They gave the wrong signals, they attacked the businessmen, some of them ran away. James Packer ran from Sri Lanka. He was one of the biggest investors who was going to do a $400 million project. So like that, this government took some decisions, Maria, which hurt them. Actually, they thought they were hurting the Rajapaksas, but actually they hurt themselves. And they found that the investment dried up. They found that no one else was coming. You know, I have had lots of the investors who come to Sri Lanka, they talk to me as well. And they say, why did this government stop this Chinese investment? Why did they stop the port city? Because they, being American investors, they like to see projects of that nature. Because then they knew then only their money is also going to give them returns. Because they want to see these projects, the real economy doing well. Because what we are doing is the financial side of it by funding and all that. But real economy, the ports, the roads, the airports, the power plants, all that must also grow. So that was what was happening, and which this government couldn't get the act together to do.
I'm going to leave you. Thank you. This was very useful. It's always important to get the other side of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hope
Happy to do so to you.
That this will not be the last time that we meet. I hope that
you call me, and then if I'm free, I certainly would like to have a chat with you, give you that side of the story. I've been happy to do that with whoever who comes, and then I'm glad that you did.
Do you mind if I use your bathroom?
Yeah, no problem. Rashini?
Yeah.
Supposed to use the toilet.
Just right here?
Yeah,
And then I'll come
she'll
back
show
and say
you.
goodbye to you.
Yep, right.
I'm just going to leave this here for a second if you don't mind.
No problem.
Are you
So you're going to be here only for a few more